Would you mind living next to someone who just came from prison? Maybe you'll say, it depends on what he has done. But what if he's a sex offender and you have 3 lovely daughters? Even then, you might say, everyone deserves a second chance because it's not true that once a criminal, always a criminal. Easy to say if your neighbor isn't a criminal. But are you sure he's not? Every year, 30 to 40,000 people return from prison into our society. That means in 14% of the Dutch streets, an ex-convict will come to live. And now I only take into account the people who have been caught and convicted. If you add the non-convicted criminals, there's a criminal in 200% of the Dutch streets. That means 2 criminals in every street. So how much do you really know about your new neighbor? Today, I'll focus on the people who went to prison and are coming back. And I'll be talking about a theater project I did in Utrecht last winter. A performance about the question, how does our society respond to people returning from prison, to ex-convicts? And about the question, does the system we have now for dealing with ex-convicts really work? I am fascinated by fear and how fear works. And today, although the criminality rate keeps dropping, a lot of people are getting more and more insecure because of all the negative stories we hear. Stories about prisoners escaping from prison, stories about prisoners not returning from their weekend leave, about ex-convicts who fall back into their old trade. Fear sells, and it's hard to change people's minds or ideas if they're based on fear. It's much easier to believe a negative story than the positive facts. So how to use theater to talk about this fear and about the preconceptions we have about certain people in our society. After working with experts like judges, lawyers, and scientists in previous performances, I now decided to find a different type of expert, the experiential expert. So I went to a neighborhood, a rough neighborhood in Utrecht, Ondiep, and I invited 5 people to be a jury member in my performance. And this jury had to decide if an ex-convict was allowed to come and live in their street. The jury members were real people, but the ex-convict was played by an actor because of privacy reasons. But all the stories he told were based on research, and all the facts in the performance were true. I myself moderated the evening, and before Jim, the ex-convict, came in, I quite playfully questioned the jury about their views on the neighborhood, on crime, on the way we should treat ex-convicts. And then Jim came in, and the jury was allowed to question him. And he would tell them about his life, about his experiences in prison, about his hopes and dreams for the future. And he would show short movies of his wife, his mother, his psychiatrist. And at the end, the jury, of course, had to reach a verdict. Could Jim come and live with them in their street? Yes or no? For 90 minutes, everyone played along with the concept. So for 90 minutes, Jim, this actor, was really an ex-convict who had killed his girlfriend and had been in prison for 8 years. And people responded also to him like they would to a real ex-convict, with this mix of curiosity and on their guard. The audience was able to observe both Jim and the jury, and were not only confronted with their thoughts and prejudices about ex-convicts, but also about people from these types of neighborhoods. And I, as a moderator, I was in the perfect position to observe both the jury and the audience, and combined with my research, it brought me to several conclusions about the reintegration of ex-convicts in our society. First, people tend to find it exciting to hear about prison life if they don't know the crime someone's convicted for. But as soon as they realize what someone has really done and the impact of his crime, the excitement is gone. Crime is sexy until it's real. Second, judging an ex-convict when he's in the room with you is much harder than when you just hear about him on the news. So meeting people makes it harder to label people as evil or bad. Third, an ex-convict has the same basic human rights as you or me, but a lot of people act like you don't. You have done something bad, and now we own you. We have the right to hear every detail of your private life, and if you don't want to tell us what crime you have committed, it only makes you look more suspicious. Fourth, as our society is becoming more and more complex, we more and more tend to label people, good and bad, us and them, because it helps us to get a grip on the world we live in. Ex-convicts suffer a lot from this division, especially in the big cities where there's no social structure to come back to. Fifth, because of the old social structures like the village and the neighborhood disappearing, it is becoming increasingly harder for ex-convicts to find a safe place to start their life again. And last, people have no idea what it means to re-enter society after having been away for several years. They have no idea of the psychological impact of being labeled as a criminal or of the limited support city offers nowadays. All my conclusions have to do with people not having enough knowledge of the situation of ex-convicts or of the impact our prison system has. And I think you can't reflect on the reintegration of ex-convicts in our society without reflecting on our prison system. Studies show that the correctional value of our prisons nowadays isn't that high. And I think we should seriously reconsider creating a more fluid prison system, a system in which people stay more connected to society instead of spending huge amounts of money to lock them away for years. Of course, we need prisons for a small, specific group of people who are wired in a way which makes them a real danger to society. But a lot of people are in prison because they're not able to find their place in society, and they gain much more from being corrected while being in touch and in contact with other people instead of being surrounded by their fellow inmates. What would be the perfect solution for this problem? I have the solution, of course. It would be much more theatre. For me, theatre is a way of creating meetings with impact between different people with different thought patterns. Like I said, it's much harder to have a simple judgment about an ex-convict when you meet one in the flesh. So theatre everywhere and for everybody. But I think the real challenge is to think about how we create these types of meetings that hardly take place in different places in our society. On a street level, in neighborhoods, in social work, in politics, because the fact that people can't find their place in our society is not their problem, it's our problem as well. At the end of the performance, most of the members of the jury allowed Jim to come and live in their street. Maybe because a lot of people were watching them and they didn't want to look bad in their eyes, or maybe because meeting an ex-convict, even though he was played by an actor, really does change people's minds. Either way, it works, and that's what counts. Sometimes it seems that we have lost our faith in the ability of people to change their lives and their habits. Once a criminal, always a criminal. But I think we forget how much we as human beings want to belong somewhere, and that this need works both ways. Ex-convicts really do want to belong amongst us, like we do as well. And we should think about how to give them that feeling, starting with rethinking the way we organize our prisons and the entry into society, and by destroying the rigid categories we have in our heads. Thank you.